All right, we're going to get started with the March 2023 session for the watercolor garden. And this has been a bit of a journey to get here. I've just moved to a new location. I'm still using my temporary internet connection, so there may be a cutout on this section, or session. If we lose connection, I will be recording the live demo and still posting the painting lesson and the book club session as a replay. So if you sign on and then our connection goes, don't worry, just keep an eye on your email and I will be reposting that today at some point. So spring has sprung here on the island, and we're going to do a little spring vignette painting on these little Strathmore watercolor postcards. I would say the paper is sort of mid-range quality. So this is sort of a cold press paper. On the back, there's a spot to write a little message, send it as a postcard with a stamp. I'd probably put it in an envelope before I send it, but that's up to you. I'm going to do portrait orientation today. So that's what we're going to do for the demo. And there wasn't as much posted in March, as I said, again, just because I was finishing the reno of our tiny home, basically gutted a 36-foot RV, built it into a tiny home, moved to a different town, so downsized, sold a bunch of stuff, and moved to the countryside. So it's been probably the busiest month of my life, and I have a bit of a back space here in the back bedroom. I am sharing it with my cats, so hopefully they're not too disruptive. I used to be able to lock them out when I did these sessions. So yeah, we'll be going over that. I will be finishing up the 12 months of Birth Flowers series soon. We will be having our daffodil lesson, which would have been for March, posted this April. So thank you for understanding on the delay of that. And then we will also just be quickly talking about this beautiful book, The Magic and Medicine of Plants. It's a Reader's Digest book. It's been in my family for a while. I think it was my granddad's. I have had it for a while now. So I'll be going over that. You could probably find it in some used bookstores. It's a really amazing book. I'm just looking for when the copyright was, yes, so 1986. So not as old as some of the books I've gone over. But yeah, we'll go over that at the end. So without further ado, let us get into the painting demo. All right, so what I'm going to do is make a little spring scene. I want to put a bird's nest here, some bluebells, and maybe some other little flowers here. I'm actually going to do a very light background because I want this to be vignette style, sort of like a spot illustration in one of Edith Holden's pages of her book. And I am using my larger palette, so not my teaching palette, just because I think this would be a little bit easier, and it's sort of fun to show different colors on these less formal demos. So I'm going to get started. I'm going to get my paint mixing brush, and I'm first going to do an entire wash of the background. So I'm choosing somewhat of an opaque blue for my background. This is Horizon Blue by Holbein, but I'm going to make it very, very watery so that I can actually paint the whole background and then sort of paint my scene over top of it. And it will just pull things together and make it a little bit more like a vignette rather than just some plants floating in space. So just keep adding the water to that. And then I'm going to anchor my painting with my bird's nest. So I'll do that in this bottom corner after I've done the bird's nest. Mind is still a little slow after the overwhelm of moving. So I'm going to take cerulean blue for my bird's eggs, make these like their little robin's eggs or maybe a mountain bluebird. And then I'll just grab a little bit of my cobalt turquoise as well. You don't have to use these exact colors, just taking note of some variation. So mixing cobalt turquoise with a little bit of the cerulean blue just to get a slightly different tone to make that a little bit more varied with some depth. And then I'll need my bird's nest colors. I'm not really going to do a fully brown nest. Taking some sap green. And then in this palette for my darker green, I have Perylene Green by Winsor and Newton still, rather than the shadow green. So you could use shadow green or Perylene Green. My cat is trying to get up on the table right now. Luna. There you go. All right, so I have two greens, and then I'm going to take a little bit of sepia to the side with some undersea green. Just any type of earthy green and brown would work, as I want this to be sort of like a nest that is on the ground and maybe a little bit mossy. And I don't mind those colors all mixing together. Okay, so now I have some color for my egg, the nest, and the background. And I am going to just do that very light wash. I don't have a hair dryer set up yet with my painting stuff, so we're just going to have to do it as is. I'm using this inexpensive dollar store brush just to create a nice big wash, and I want it to be thin so that one, it's light in color, two, it dries quickly. And just grab a little bit more pigment, and I'm also on purpose not going to paint right out to the edges, as I want this to again be sort of like a illustrative vignette. And you can check out some of the recent blog posts on how to start your own country diary. It talks a bit more about what an illustrated vignette is. And then I'll make a little bit darker just towards the bottom here. And just spread that out like that. And it's a little bit more faint on the camera, but it does cover the whole sort of postcard with a little bit of a tint. So we're not looking for anything that is dark at all. We just want to cover the whole postcard with a bit of color. I'm just going to let that sit and settle for a moment. And because I don't have a hair dryer, what I'm going to do while we wait for that is just to go over some of the book that we've been talking about, or that I mentioned. So I'm going to set this aside. So yes, I've had this book for quite a while. It's really inspiring, beautiful illustrations. It has so many different plants in it. It's a bit of a feature of each plant. What I like about it is that it's the same illustrator that has done all the plants, and I wonder if it even says, I don't have the jacket for it anymore, how many plants are in it. There's this beautiful illustration at the front, which is a lot like an Edith Holden illustration. Luna, off. Miss Kitty would like to be joining in on the session today. So first of all, there's an about section, and there's plants in Myth and Magic. So there's some sort of informational sections. ABCs of plants, so finding them in the wild, making your own herbarium, anatomy of plants, nature's chemical industry, about plant names, plants, people, and medicine, gallery of medicinal plants, poisonous plants, exotic plants, growing and using herbs. So there's quite a lot of information in here. And I actually really enjoy reading all these sections. There's some really sort of medieval looking historical illustrations in the informational section. It goes over a lot of different cultural beliefs. So there's quite a bit of an intro with that. And then the Gallery of Medicinal Plants starts on page 75. There's a bit of an intro, and then we get into this section where there's a feature on each different plant. This is the part I love. So it has like an actual photo and then the illustration of each plant and a write-up, and as well as the Latin name and then a bunch of common names, which family each one belongs to. And you can pretty much find most of the plants you're familiar with in here. And that shaking noise there is my cat, the other cat, jumping on the table. Yeah, so here's one that I'm familiar with, crane's bill. So it's geranium. There's dovefoot, old maid's nightcap, shameface. Not sure where that name came from. Wild geranium. So all these different names, a little bit of a write-up. And this is a great way to, if you wanted to start painting some plants, but you're not sure how to illustrate them, this is a great way to get an idea of how to start your painting off. Here's one of the foxglove. Sweet gum. So they even feature some trees, some aquatic plants, the poppy, rocket, so field flowers, herbs, passion flower. So there's a really wide range of plant features in this book. So I imagine, oh, wild ginger, that's one of my favorites. When we have this here, you have to lift up the leaves so you can find these beautiful exotic little brown maroon flowers underneath. So if you ever see this in the woods, lift up the leaves and see if it's flowering. Usually I think it's April through June flowers. So if you do find this book in a used bookstore, I'd highly recommend picking it up. It's one of my favorites. Okay, so this is dry enough now. It's still a little bit damp, but I'm going to go ahead with the painting. I'm using my number 2 brush. And this is not going to be super formal, so I'm just going to start with the eggs, doing 3 eggs, and I'll just leave a space of light in the middle for a highlight. I'll just zoom in a little here. And I'm just going to lighten up my camera here a bit. Oh, that was darkening. It's a bit better. Okay. So I have one little egg. Now I'll take the other blue. And I'm trying to make one sort of more pointy, narrower end, and then one that's that thicker. And like the shape of an egg, roughly. So there's the other one that's darker. I'll go back to the lighter color. And I'm just going to have this one sort of peeking out from behind. So it kind of is just melding into the other egg right now. But we'll define that after. So those are my little eggs. Now I'll rinse out my brush. And I'll just start making the nest. So I'm just sort of going to, don't really worry about if it bleeds in a little. I'm just going to sort of speckle some color around for the nest. Now I'll rinse and dip and dab my brush. Just some of the nest peeking out up here. And then I'll take my darker color and just sort of spread that around a bit more. Now I'll take the brown and just pausing here while I remove a cat. Everybody wants to be involved. And then taking that brown color and this dark color, a bit more of this perylene green, I just want to drop that in, making just a bit more of a shadow right here. And so I'm just looking for having some light variation, blending of colors. It doesn't need to be exact. I kind of like how the colors are bleeding together. So I'm going to leave that like that for now. And then I will define those eggs a bit more as well. What I'm going to do right now is take some yellow, a cool yellow, like lemon yellow. I'm going to mix in some white. And while the nest dries with my number 2 brush, I'm just going to imply what will look like some little cowslips or light yellow primroses, like a patch of them growing here beside the nest in a little field. Bring this in a bit more. And then I'll take my orangey color here, a bit of the yellow, and just drop this in the center of each little flowery mark that I've made. Then I'll take my nest color as a green and just drop down some stems, sort of all clustering together, and I'll start adding in some leaves and sort of bringing that together a bit more. Back to the blue. I'm just going to define these eggs a bit more. So sort of the bottom area and the outline, tidying up those shapes. I'm agitating a bit of that green with my brush just to smooth it out and make the egg a little bit more prominent. And then I'll just do the same with this one here, but I sort of want it to look like it is tucked out behind the moss. So that looks a little bit more defined now. Now I'll take my greens and just speckle through a little bit more here. Rinse out my brush and then just wash that in. So now you kind of have a little nest there. Now what I'm going to do is take some of my cobalt turquoise with sap green, just to make a bit of a bluier green. wipe away a bit of that water. And now what I'm going to do is I want to make a patch of bluebells coming up behind the nest. So I'm just going to make the leaves first off. So just pressing down, lifting up. I think I want to mute that color a bit more, so I'll take some undersea green. So just thin, light pressure, pressing down, flicking out. And then overlapping and bending some of the leaves. And this is not really to scale, where the nest will be very tiny compared to the bluebells, but we're just having fun with a little bit of a countryside scene in the spring. Now I'll take some lavender, which is an opaque Holbein color, which is just something to have fun with. And then I'll also take some Windsor violet. And I'm going to mix some of the Windsor violet with the lavender just to see what that looks like. Sort of a nice light bluebelly color, but then I'll need a bluer color as well. And I'll take my horizon blue here that I used for the background with some of the lavender. And then a little bit of cerulean blue, just to get a bit more of a bluebell color. Rinse out my brush. Wipe away that splatter, and now I'm just going to sort of stipple in little markings that are going to sort of form a cascade shape. So I'm just doing the flowers in a bit of a fan-shaped inflorescence, and then I'll join them together after to make them look more like bluebells on a stem. Of course, I want to add in those warm and cool colors still. So add some of the warmer color. So just think about flowers that are all nodding together. You can even mix some of the cool colors with the warm to make a third color. And I'm just really making little blobs with my brush. All right, so I have my bluebells mapped in, primroses mapped in, and now I'm just going to connect everything and add some stems here, add some leaves here. Still using my number 2 brush. Just waking up the bluebell green, twisting my brush, dabbing it. I'm going to make kind of a main stem that will go down from each spike, but I'm not starting it right at the top because I want those sort of little connector stems to be smaller. So I'll use my 00 brush for that. Just make sure everything goes all the way down past the nest. Rinsing that brush out. Switching to my 00 brush. Dab the excess. Now, just making those thinner stems and those sort of little curved connector stems. And some of them can be more faint. Now with my smaller brush, I'm just going to take more of the flower colors, wipe away that water, and then just make a little bit more sort of definition in some of these little bluebell shapes. This is a great style of little illustration to do in your sketchbook. So you could make this sort of an illustrative vignette of a little landscape scene of what you are seeing while you're out on a hike or adventure, and then do some more botanical style illustrations along with it to make sort of a sketchbook page that is something like one of those nature snapshots, which you can look at on the Watercolor Garden Get Inspired page, which sort of breaks down how to create a page like that, and this can be one of your elements of that page, the vignette. So now I have a little bit more definition on my bluebells. I've got my nest, so now I'll switch over to my primrose or cowslip and back to my other greens here. Now those leaves on the cowslips are very textured, so I'm just going to imply that by just sort of stippling about, and then dip dab my brush and just sort of taking into account that growth pattern of leaves on primroses, and then putting some darker colors in at the bottom. So just implying a nice little patch like that, and then with some clean damp water, just sort of dragging out some of that color and connecting it into the nest area, just like that. So now our little scene is coming together. And then I think what I'll do is just taking a little bit of that same watery green color, just kind of implying a bit more greenery back here by just watering it out. Like that. And then I will just take some of the darker green as well and just lightly stroke that through some of these bluebell leaves. Switching to the 00 brush and the bluebell color, just make some thin sort of indications of midribs on the bigger leaves. Drag this one down a little bit more, like that. And that is our little spring scene with bluebells, primrose, and a little bird's nest. So you could create something like this in your sketchbook, or you can give this as a card for spring or Easter. You could use this and then mount it on a card base like we've done in other videos. And so yeah, I hope you enjoyed this, and I'd love to see what you create in our Facebook group.